Have you ever looked up at the sky right as the seasons are changing and just wondered, how do billions of birds know exactly where to go? I mean, how do they know when to leave, and how on earth do they actually get there? It is absolutely one of nature's greatest puzzles. So today we're diving into a really thought-provoking explainer based on a source text that breaks down this massive biological mystery. We're going to look at the accepted scientific theories, and then we'll explore how the author attempts to completely turn those theories on their head. To set the stage for our journey today, the author actually starts with a super nostalgic childhood memory from an old primary school textbook. And it's a perfectly universal image, right? As kids, we just accept this behavior as a charming little sign of the changing seasons. We see the geese forming a V shape, or what the textbook calls a fork, and we just instantly know winter is coming. But as we're about to see, this everyday sight hides an incredibly complex, almost unbelievable system of navigation and endurance. Section 1. A Sky Full of Mystery. This source author's curiosity really takes off from a pretty wild on-the-ground observation they made at a gas station in Zimbabwe. Imagine this. They were just waiting in line for petrol when they noticed dozens, and soon nearly 1,000, crow-like birds gathering up in a tree. They were chattering, making a massive racket, almost like they were holding a pre-flight briefing. And then, they all take off together. They started spiraling upwards, higher and higher. Now, the author initially thought they were just playing around, but then the highest birds suddenly locked on to a northwest trajectory, flying in a dead straight line. As the lower birds reached that exact same altitude, they too caught that invisible high-altitude highway. It wasn't a game at all. It was a highly coordinated, strategic departure. Section 2. Epic Feats of Flight. When we really look at the sheer scale of these migrations, the numbers are just staggering. Take the Arctic tern. It travels a mind-boggling 35,200 kilometers round trip from pole to pole every single year. Or consider wild geese, flying right over the Himalayas at an altitude of 9,000 meters. That is literally higher than Mount Everest. But honestly, perhaps the most stunning is the blackpoll warbler. This is a bird that weighs about 20 grams, basically the weight of a few coins. Yet it flies over 3,800 kilometers nonstop for 4 days and nights. Just imagine running a marathon for 4 days straight with absolutely no food or rest. That's the level of pure endurance we're talking about here. Now, the source highlights an incredible detail that makes this even crazier. These young birds navigate to a place they've never seen, entirely without adult guides. If you thought the physical endurance was impressive, the logistics of the journey are even wilder. In a lot of species, like cuckoos, the parents actually leave for the winter migration days before their babies do. So these young birds who have never once left their birthplace make their very first migration completely alone. They fly thousands of kilometers to a totally foreign landscape and somehow, unerringly, find their exact species and sometimes their exact parents waiting for them. This brings the author to a barrage of rapid-fire questions, starting with how they even sense the changing seasons. Without calendars, weather apps, or satellite data, how does a bird actually know that winter is creeping in? And more importantly, how do they calculate the exact meteorological conditions required for a safe departure? The author also questions the mechanics of knowing where these invisible high-altitude highways lead. Think back to those birds in Zimbabwe. How did they know that if they just kept spiraling up, they'd eventually hit a current flowing specifically to the northwest? And how could they possibly know that at the end of that current, thousands of miles away, there's going to be a habitat blooming with springtime flowers and abundant food? And the final mystery here asks how a bird can execute a flawless, unguided round trip over oceans without going astray. I mean, how do you cross a featureless ocean completely without a compass? How do you know when to turn? This is the core puzzle that has baffled humans for centuries. Section 3. 4 Scientific Theories. To answer these massive questions, science traditionally relies on 4 main frameworks. First up, there's the biological clock theory, which suggests birds use the sun and stars to constantly calculate and adjust their flight angles. Second, the inherent meteorologist theory posits that birds can somehow read temperature, light, and barometric pressure to ride the perfect winds. Third, the geomagnetic theory states birds are highly sensitive to the Earth's magnetic fields, effectively using them like a built-in internal compass. And finally, the evolutionary theory suggests that millions of years of trial and error have hardwired these seasonal patterns right into their genetics. Section 4. The author's skepticism. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because the author completely pivots here, laying out some pretty harsh critiques of these established answers. They reject the first theory by pointing out what they see as the absolute absurdity of a tiny bird doing complex calculations without a compass or a sextant. The source argues that if a bird is consciously calculating sun angles and high-altitude airflows, they're essentially performing complex, dynamic mathematics on the fly. To the author, the idea that a brain the size of your little finger can outcalculate human mathematicians without any instruments is just too mythological to accept. Addressing the meteorologist theory, the author questions what happens during bad weather and notes the uncanny precision of swallows returning to a specific town on the exact same date. If birds merely rely on sensing good weather to find air currents, what happens when it rains for a week straight? The author points out they just miss the current entirely and freeze to death. Furthermore, the source notes a really specific example. Swallows in a small American town return at dawn on exactly March 29th, year after year. The author argues that mere weather sensing simply cannot account for that level of calendar precision. The author also finds the geomagnetic theory lacking, asking how magnetism equates to finding atmospheric wind patterns. Sure, while magnetic fields might give you a general sense of north and south, the source questions how an internal compass could possibly alert a bird to a fast-moving physical air current several kilometers up in the sky. Or for that matter, how it tells a bird exactly which specific patch of forest to return to. Using the analogy of a chick breaking its shell, the author questions why birds haven't evolved past being prey if they've supposedly accumulated millions of years of genetic intelligence. The source approaches evolution with deep skepticism here. The author argues that if birds have been evolving for hundreds of millions of years and are smart enough to perfectly encode global navigation into their DNA, why did their evolution just suddenly hit a roadblock? Why are they still getting caught in human nets and shot by hunters? The author uses a great analogy of the very first chick breaking the very first eggshell on Earth, arguing it did so without any inherited genetic experience, which they say challenges the very premise of evolutionary trial and error. Section 5. The power of instinct. So, what is the author's own philosophical conclusion to this whole mystery? Well, they clearly state that without attributing this to a creator, the scientific debate is just an endless chicken or egg guessing game. In the source material, the author makes a really distinct philosophical pivot. They argue that attempting to explain these miracles purely through random chance or evolutionary mechanics leaves us just going in circles. For the author, the flawless, intricate design of migration points away from a random evolution and directly toward intelligent design. The source argues that species have fixed, irreplaceable features designed specifically for their survival rather than evolving random overlapping skills. The author paints a picture of a highly ordered natural world where boundaries are strictly maintained. An antelope eats grass, it doesn't just suddenly evolve to eat meat. A dog doesn't lay eggs. The author's point is that nature is filled with specific, deliberate characteristics tailored for each species' exact purpose, rather than a chaotic, randomized blend of evolving traits. So the ultimate answer the author lands on is simply instinct, a perfect, pre-programmed behavior that cannot be explained by calculation or evolution. Just as a bee doesn't whip out a protractor to build a honeycomb with mathematically perfect 109.28-degree angles, a bird doesn't sit there and calculate airstreams. The source argues that this isn't learned behavior, and it isn't evolving behavior. It's a fixed, miraculous instinct placed within them from the very beginning. Based on everything we've looked at in this explainer, I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder about the skies above us. We've seen the astonishing data of birds flying completely across the globe. We've reviewed the standard scientific theories of biological clocks and magnetics, and we've explored the source author's passionate argument that these mechanics are just too flawless to be anything other than divine instinct. So, the next time you see a flock of birds forming a V-shape in the crisp autumn sky, what do you think is really guiding them? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me.